This film begins by showing a scene in 1858 where the slavery of the black race by the white race is still happening. At that time, 2 male masters of the white race rode their horses to travel to a city while 5 black men had to walk with their hands in iron chains. That night, when they were about to pass through a forest, a white man who claimed to be a dentist named Dr. King Schultz stopped them. Dr. King intends to buy one of the slaves of the 2 male masters to help him find the Brittle brothers. After discovering that a black slave man named Django recognizes the Brittle brothers, Dr. King sets out to free and take him. However, because the 2 male masters refused to hand over Django, Dr. King was forced to kill one of them and let the other live before finally paying some money to the surviving master. After that, Dr. King freed the other 4 men so they could escape to a safer place, while Django went with him. Unlike other white people at that time, he seemed to respect and value black people equally. When Drs. King and Django arrived at a small town in the desert, the townspeople looked surprised because they had first seen a black man allowed to ride a horse, which was an unusual sight for them. Not only that, but when they stopped by a bar, the man who owned the bar also seemed surprised by the arrival of a black man in his bar. At that time, bars or nightclubs were usually reserved for white races, so the man who owned the bar immediately rushed to find the sheriff to report the incident. While the barman was busy looking for the sheriff, Dr. King poured himself a couple of beers in 2 glasses to enjoy with Django while talking about their business. In the middle of their conversation, an old man who served as a sheriff in the city came up to the 2 of them and intended to arrest them. But before the sheriff can take action, Dr. King shoots the sheriff and asks the barman to call the marshal, an official above the sheriff. When a marshal arrives, Dr. King asks Django to remain calm while negotiating with the marshal. Dr. King approached Marshall and showed him an official pamphlet stating that the sheriff was a Texas City criminal who had to be caught alive or dead. This is because the sheriff had committed a serious crime 3 years ago. When Dr. King and Django were resting in a cave, Django told him about his wife, Broomhilda von Schaft, who suddenly disappeared some time ago. He looks surprised that Django's wife has a German name because he is also German. Django explained that his wife was raised by German noble descent, so she has a German national name. As they continued their journey and arrived in Tennessee City, Dr. King officially freed Django and let him choose his own suit because they were going to a ranch owned by the Brittle brothers. When Django and Dr. King arrived at Big Daddy's estate, people looked surprised to see Django, who looked neat and had his own horse. At first, Big Daddy was about to refuse them, especially when he saw Django riding his horse as if he was an equal to white people. When Dr. King offered a fantastic price to buy one of the black girls from Big Daddy's estate, he immediately invited Dr. King to enter. Meanwhile, Django, traveling around the ranch, managed to find a member of the Brittle brothers named John, who had tortured him and tortured his wife very cruelly. When John Brittle is about to torture one of the female workers on the ranch, Django rushes over and kills him with a small gun that Django had hidden in his arm. After killing John, Django also tortured another member of the Brittle brothers named Phyllis so that he could feel the suffering that had been experienced by the slaves. After being satisfied with beating him, Django shoots him right in the head so that he dies instantly. After that, Dr. King, who had just arrived at the ranch area, asked where the location of the last Brittle member was, and Django pointed at a male foreman who was riding in the middle of the ranch. Soon after, Dr. King aimed at the foreman and killed him with only 1 bullet shot. After all the members of the Brittle brothers were killed, Big Daddy and his men went to Dr. King and Django to ask why they did all that. In the same way as before, Dr. King handed over an official arrest warrant stating that the 3 Brittle brothers were state criminals who had to be caught alive or dead. After reading the letter, Big Daddy had no choice but to let his 3 foremen die and let Dr. King go with Django. That night when Django and Dr. King rested, Dr. King offered to help him find his wife on the condition that Django had to help him complete the hunt for the criminal before winter ended. After Django agreed to the deal, Dr. King began teaching him how to shoot by relying on movement speed and shooting accuracy. Unexpectedly, in a short time, Django was able to master shooting techniques, and Dr. King began to recognize his great potential as one of the fastest shooters then. After weeks of hunting for criminals, they finally completed their mission and killed dozens of the country's criminals. The next day, Dr. King and Django go to Mississippi, which is thought to be the place where Broomhilda is currently located. After checking the population census data in the city, it is known that she lives in there and is currently the slave of a rich man named Calvin Candy. Dr. King knew that Calvin owned the country's largest cotton plantation, so it was difficult for them to buy Broomhilda. Soon afterward, Dr. King advises Django to use another strategy and prepare a well-thought-out plan so that they can retrieve Broomhilda safely. They pretend to be businessmen who want to buy one of Calvin's best Mandingo fighters because it is known that Calvin is obsessed with Mandingo fighters and often sells the strongest fighters. The Mandingo fight is between two black slaves who have to fight until one dies to determine who is the winner. After arriving at Calvin's house and seeing Mandingo fighters briefly, Dr. King offered $12,000 for the best fighter Calvin had. Hearing that the offer was quite high, he took Dr. King and Django to his private villa, where he locked up many of Mandingo's strongest fighters. On the way, Calvin finds one of the fighting men hiding in a tree because he wants to escape from his place. The fighter admitted that he was tired because he was forced to continue fighting against his own race, so he begged Calvin to forgive him. However, instead of forgiving the fighting man, Calvin ordered his men to release 2 wild dogs to eat the man alive until he died. Dr. King, who witnessed their cruelty, chose to turn away because he could not bear to witness his inhumane, cruel act. Even though Dr. King is a criminal hunter, he still has a bit of humanity and conscience, so he doesn't have the heart to see someone being tortured. After arriving at Calvin's private villa, Django and Dr. King met one of his confidants named Stephen. Stephen seemed surprised to see Django being allowed to ride his own horse because he couldn't accept that another black man was getting special treatment. Even though Calvin had explained that Django had been freed by Dr. King, Stephen was still grumbling behind his back. After that, Calvin asked Stephen about the whereabouts of a slave girl that he had previously told Dr. King. Stephen said she was locked in a hot iron box because she had tried to escape from the villa. Then, Calvin ordered him to take her out of the hot box because tonight, she would be assigned to meet and serve Dr. King as he had previously agreed. When Django saw that the woman locked in a box by Stephen was his wife, Django felt so angry and hurt that he almost pulled out his gun. But he tried to be patient and not act rashly to safely get her out of place. In the evening, Broomhilda is escorted by Calvin's sister, Lara, to Dr. King's room. At first, Broomhilda looked scared because she was worried that Dr. King would do something bad to her, but he managed to calm her and greeted her in German. Dr. King then explained that he had come to the place to help her and bring her together with people who she might know. When he brought her to Django, she couldn't help but cry and faint because she didn't think that her husband would come to save her. The following night at a dinner banquet, after Django and Dr. King had seen all of Calvin's fighters, they were interested in buying a strong fighter at a fairly high price. Hearing this, Calvin was very happy because he could sell his fighter at a much higher price than the average price in the market. Furthermore, Dr. King said he was also interested in buying one of his slave girls, Broomhilda, at a fairly high price. Hearing his offer, Calvin and his family laughed because they were surprised by Dr. King, who was attracted to a slave he had just met. Even Calvin, who was too excited, asked Stephen to take off her clothes and show the lashes on her back in front of everyone. At that moment, Django started to lose his temper and almost pulled his gun from its holster because he couldn't bear to see his wife humiliated in front of everyone. Fortunately, Calvin's younger sister Lara immediately stopped Stephen's actions because she didn't want to spoil everyone's appetite with the wound. Fortunately, Django also managed to control his anger and cancel his intention to kill everyone in that place. At that moment, Stephen had seen Django and Broomhilda looking at each other and began to suspect that there was something they both were hiding. Stephen then invites Calvin to speak privately in his room to tell him about his suspicions about the relationship between Django, Dr. King, and Broomhilda. In that conversation, Stephen manages to convince Calvin that Dr. King and Django's real goal is to pick up Broomhilda because he believes that Broomhilda has a special relationship with Django and all talk about Mandingo's fighter is just bullshit. Hearing his explanation, Calvin felt very angry and returned to the dining room carrying the skull of a slave he had killed. In a rage, Calvin forces Drs. King and Django to come clean about their true intentions and threatens them by pointing an iron hammer at Broomhilda's head. When the situation became tense and at gunpoint by Calvin's men, Dr. King was forced to admit that their original purpose in coming to his place was to pick up Broomhilda. Hearing Dr. King's confession, Calvin allowed him to take Broomhilda away on the condition that he had to pay $12,000. Hearing that, he agreed to this so they could immediately take her out of place. While Calvin is writing Broomhilda's release letter, Dr. King looks very depressed and constantly remembers the incident when Calvin allowed a fighter to be torn apart by 2 vicious dogs while he was still alive. Then when they were about to take Broomhilda out of place, Calvin suddenly called Dr. King and invited him to shake hands as a sign that they had agreed to the deal. However, because Dr. King is so fed up with Calvin, he refuses to shake Calvin's hands, and it immediately makes him furious. Calvin even threatened to order his men to kill Broomhilda if Dr. King didn't shake his hand in 10 seconds. At that moment, Dr. King, who had lost his patience, decided to shoot Calvin with a small gun he hid in his sleeve. Sadly, that action got both of them killed. After they died, Django had to deal with all of his remaining men while protecting Broomhilda from enemies. Django's very fast and accurate shooting ability killed all of Calvin's family, including Stephen and his men in the house. Django deliberately leaves Stephen alive and only shoots him in the leg before finally Django blows up the house with dynamite that had been secretly installed. That night, Django managed to save his wife from slavery and left the place on a horse belonging to the late Dr. King. At that time, he recalled the words of Dr. King, who had mentioned that he had a talent for shooting very quickly and accurately, so Dr. King was sure he would become a legend one day. What Dr. King said was proven true because Django was known as a legend of the fastest shooter from the South after that incident. This is the end of this film. This film teaches us to never demean others regardless of their race or ethnicity, and always treat others as we would like to be treated.